Broadcast is live.
We are live. How are you, Jason?
I'm doing very well, thanks. How are you, Golden?
I'm doing really good.
Excellent.
I was
Looking
up at
forward to-
6:30 this morning doing a boot camp workout at the YMCA.
What?
I got whooped.
Don't do that. That sounds terrible.
Actually, it was really good.
That's good. Those are pretty good for you, I hear.
Yeah. Fun to have something to do during COVID era.
That's true. Yeah. Get out.
Trying to have goals
that's
here.
A very productive and positive thing to do. Go out and get some exercise.
What are some fun hobbies you've been taking up?
I haven't really taken up anything new. Well, I likewise have started a workout routine. On going at 8 months strong, actually.
Nice.
I don't go out to do it or anything. I don't do boot camps. I'm not super hardcore. I just have some equipment. I have like a kettlebell and some stretchy bands and stuff like that. And so I look up routines on the internet and try them out.
That's awesome.
Fun. Yeah. Good.
Well, as people getting here online.
Yeah, we got a couple of hellos.
Yeah, hello.
So yeah, looking forward to another fun tech talk with you here. I think the topic today is pretty exciting.
Yeah. Today, we are talking about compression. And by the way, I'm Golden Preciado, audio engineer and House of Worship specialist with QSC. And I'm here along with Jason Fernandez, who is our live sound training specialist.
Correct.
With QSC. Yeah, I'm excited to be talking about this subject. It's one
of my favorite things to talk about. And it's something that I still feel like a lot of people kind of struggle with, or have some misconceptions about, or just complete misunderstandings in general. So
and
it a little bit.
One of the most powerful mixing tools, and
Absolutely.
Really an essential element behind every good mix. So super important. So music compression is really the process of reducing a signal's dynamic range. And the dynamic range is the difference between the loudest and the quietest parts of an audio signal. And really the truth of the matter is you need to reduce the dynamic range of most audio signals for them to sound natural on a recording and even during live sound reinforcement. For example, let's imagine a whisper and then a scream on the same audio track, or a whisper and then a scream happening within seconds of each other during a live performance with sound reinforcement. If they were the same difference in loudness as they are in real life, it would be very distracting. I remember doing a play. I was asked to run sound for a school play, and I had walked in. They had their mics on and they were practicing. There were no dynamics engaged yet. And as they were rehearsing their lines, there was this quiet part where they were talking, and then all of a sudden they all started yelling. And I was just like, ow, oh my gosh, that hurts. And everybody listening was like, ow, that hurts. But this is where compressors can fix this by attenuating or squashing that, and squashing the louder parts of the signal, and making the quieter parts more apparent, and resulting in a much more pleasing mix.
Yes, much more pleasing and much more natural in many cases.
Yeah, exactly. Really quick, I wanted to bring up, to understand what you're about to teach us, Jason, with compression, we need to know what transients are.
Correct.
And I have a slide for this.
Excellent.
Transients are the initial high energy moments of a certain sound in our waveform. For example, think of a nice cracking snare. As the snare hits, there's an initial peak in your waveform, as indicated right there by the yellow, that slowly tapers off. It's that initial peak energy that is your transient. Since transients are often, yes, exactly. And since transients are often louder than the rest of your waveform, compressors are going to affect those considerably.
Yes.
And I'm excited what you're about to teach us. Let's bring the next slide up. Oh, that's me. Hold on one second.
You, Golden, let's bring the next slide up.
Hey. I was so excited about this slide because Jason is going to teach us about the 5 controls at the helm of the Starship Compressor. And since I'm a Trekkie, I had to put this one up. It just made me so happy. So, Jason, take it away.
We will now boldly go into the universe of compression.
Yes.
Awesome. Excellent. Okay, so I have a few PowerPoint slides of my own that I'm going to start with. So we saw the transient that you provided, Golden. So that is kind of the initial attack of an audio form, highlighted in the yellow as you demonstrated. I'm going to switch over to my own slide here. And this is because I want to kind of just lay out a little precursor to help us understand what the compressor is actually going to be doing to this audio signal. So what I have here, I've drawn a very crude representation of an audio form, a waveform. We've got our peaks and our valleys. That is how sound works. A compressor works by setting a threshold at some point within the dynamic range of that audio signal. And the threshold is the point at which the compressor actually starts to compress that signal. So that is the point where it more or less activates and starts to compress. So it's only compressing the part of the signal that is above or that is exceeding that threshold. And when it does so, it's going to end up looking something like that. Okay, so you still have those peaks that we see. The peaks are still able to kind of round up above the threshold. So we're not completely limiting that audio signal, which was what a limiter does. We're compressing it. And so all we're doing is we're lessening the amount that those peaks are above that threshold point. And what that does is it kind of just softens those peaks and brings them closer to the lower port. So we're compressing, we're squishing the overall dynamic range of that audio signal. Hence the name compressor. That's what it's doing. It's squashing the dynamic range of that audio signal. And then if we extrapolate that a little more and put it more in context of sound over time, over the course of a period of time, a single audio signal has, depending on what it is, most dynamic audio will be able to have pretty quiet moments and then really loud moments and then kind of everything in between them. Okay, so again, here's my crude representation of audio over time. You can see it's got its quiet moments there, then it's got a pretty loud section in the middle, then it gets quiet again. If we engage our compressor here, we're going to set a threshold. And what we're doing, what we want to watch out for, what we want to set it to is just kind of like the most extreme, the highest peaks in that overall instance or the overall dynamic range of that signal. So with a threshold set to something like this, you can see a lot of the signal is actually living below our threshold line. It's only those kind of extreme moments when it gets really loud for those moments that it's going to hit that threshold and go over the threshold. And that's the point where we want to start compressing it and bringing those peaks closer to the uncompressed peaks. And that would look something like that. So that is a pretty nice looking compressed audio signal where we still have those peaks just kind of eclipsing the threshold there, but they're very manageable. So even though they are getting the loud parts of the signal, they're getting over that threshold, they're not much higher than the unaffected peaks, the quieter parts of the signal below the threshold. So the whole thing, the whole dynamic range of that audio signal lives now within a more comfortable range and in a more manageable range. So we can manage this signal a lot easier. And this allows us to do a couple things. We can actually, now that we have our compression kind of handling our dynamics for us, we can actually take that whole compressed signal and we can boost it up a little bit. And that'll give us the effect of the lower parts of our signal, like the very, very, very quietest parts of the signal becoming louder without having to worry about the parts that get really loud getting too loud. So that's one advantage of it. But the overall advantage of applying a compressor to any signal is just to give us a more manageable dynamic range so that it can live easier within the mix, so that it can play nicely with other elements of the mix. And so you don't ever have moments, where it gets so loud that it's going to hurt your ears or it's going to damage your equipment, things like that. So you want to kind of protect everything from that. And audio being what it is, it has dynamics. It can get loud, it can get quiet, and which is great, which is cool. But being able to manage that and keep it mostly consistent is very advantageous.
Right.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and take a look at the compressor on the touch mix, and we're gonna hit those 5 controls that Golden outlined for us here. So I'm gonna punch over here. Here's my touch mix 16, my trusty, faithful touch mix 16 here. Got a lot of use out of this guy, as I'm sure you can tell. I've already got it kind of queued up to our compressor screen here. If you are unfamiliar, I can back out of this. From our fader screen, from our main mix view here, if I simply press the gray area above any of those faders, that will take me into the signal processing for that channel. And then I have the tab up here with my compressor. I've got my EQ, I've got my compressor and gate and so on. So we're taking a look at the compressor today. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this on with that toggle right there. So I've got my comp out and in. So I'm going to switch it to in, and now my compressor has come to life. It is illuminated and our graph is lit up, and now my compressor is active. And now around the main graph in the center here are the 5 controls that Golden outlined. We've got our threshold, our ratio, our attack, our release, and our gain, often called makeup gain, depending on what compressor you're looking at. I would like to state at this point, and I think Golden's going to reinforce this further in a little bit, but all of the controls that are on this compressor are the same controls that are on any compressor. So they might have slightly different names. They usually don't. And they might look a little different. That might be organized a little differently on the screen or the GUI or whatever, but you're going to get all of these controls on just about any compressor. So let's go through them one at a time. The first is our threshold, and I've already kind of set up what that is with my graph here. So the threshold, indicates that line that I drew through my audio signal. That is the point at which it's going to activate. And when I just turn this on, our kind of default setting is -12 dB there. I think you can see that. Now with that control, that parameter highlighted, I can take my wheel and I can adjust it. I can take it down or I can take it up. And you can see that change represented on our main graphic here, which makes it pretty easy.
The yellow part, that's a picture of a wave, waveform, actually.
If I back it all the way off, you can kind of see that that's just a basic graphic representation of an audio signal, a wave signal. And this dynamic line that you're going to see start to move here as I activate these controls is just a visual key, a visual representation of what the compressor is doing to this audio signal. So when I adjust the threshold down, you can see it goes lower and lower and lower down that audio signal, meaning the compressor is being set lower and lower and lower and lower in the dynamic range of that signal. So what that means is the lower the threshold is, the quicker or the sooner it is going to activate. So it's not going to take a whole lot of level from that signal to start compressing. If I have it all the way off at 0, it's going to do nothing. It's not going to give me any compression because at no point are we going to breach that threshold. So you really need to kind of dial this down and find the appropriate spot where this will live. And you will know this by 2 things. First is going to be your meter here. Every compressor is going to have a gain reduction meter. This is what the GR stands for right there. You've got an input and an output meter, and then your gain reduction meter. The gain reduction meter is going to show you how much gain reduction you're getting, or how much gain reduction the compressor is applying to your signal. And you can kind of use that as a visual cue to kind of see at what point you want to have this guy set. The other tool that you're going to want to get comfortable using is your ears. Over time, the more experience you get using a compressor, you'll be able to start to kind of hear when and how much the compressor is compressing that signal.
So let's talk about that input signal coming in, because that is going to determine where you're going to drop that threshold to. We talked about gain staging last week.
Yes, good point.
So gain staging and getting your input signal up to the proper level is super important. But let's say you didn't get proper level going into that meter, and they're already in the middle of the performance and you're wanting to adjust that compressor. You may have to bring that threshold way down to compensate for your lack of low signal. Yeah, just like that. So super important. Go back to the gain staging video from last week.
Yes. Make sure you get that taken care of, right? And then all of your tools after that point, your EQ, your compressor, your effects, everything is just going to be a lot easier to use, and it's going to sound a lot better.
Absolutely.
Good point. Step 1, gain stage. Then once you're in your compressor, hopefully if you've got a healthy gain level, it'll be easy to find a a nice threshold point for your compressor. So there we go. So that's the threshold. Coming over here to the ratio is how much compression we are applying to the signal that is above our threshold. So once we get into compression, how much are we compressing that signal? And this is expressed as a ratio, which is what the parameter is called. And right now, like the default is 2.5 to 1. So what that is saying is for every 2.5 or 2.5 decibels, our signal is going over our threshold. The compressor is going to reduce that to a single dB. All right. So to make this a little easier to explain, we'll get it right about 2. So at a 2-to-1 ratio, I'll just use an even number here. So 2-to-1 ratio means for every 2 decibels we exceed the threshold, we reduce that to 1 decibel. So we're essentially kind of cutting that in half at that point. And if you keep going, if you extrapolate further, so if you go above the threshold 4 dB, that gets compressed to 2. 6 becomes 3, 8 becomes 4, so on and so forth. 10 becomes 5. So you can see, the more we go over the threshold, the more compression gets applied based on that ratio. And a 2-to-1 is a pretty mild ratio. It's pretty mellow compression. And as you start to increase this parameter, if we get it somewhere around 5 or 6-to-1, that is what most people consider pretty extreme compression. Because if you, again, extrapolate those numbers up, so if we're at a 6-to-1 ratio, that means for every 6 dB we go over our threshold, our compressor is going to reduce that to 1 dB. So we're getting 1 dB out of 6 dB. So that's already pretty high. And then if it keeps going, 12 dB gets reduced to 2 dB. That's pretty extreme, and you're definitely going to notice that's going to start to be pretty audible. You're going to get a little bit of it's similar to the effect of clipping, not quite as harsh or extreme, but it's going to start to give a little bit of a distorted sound to the signal. So depending on what you're compressing and the desired effect you're going for will be dictated by your threshold. I would say a pretty standard ratio for like a vocalist in a live scenario would be about 3-to-1, 2.5 to 3-to-1. If you were going for like a snare drum, you could hit it a little harder, maybe go to 4-to-1. Actually, even if you're doing backup vocals, if you have a backup singers or even a backup vocal section, if a couple of singers, oftentimes it's advantageous to put a little bit heavier compression on them, just so you can allow them to sit in the mix a little better, because inherently you're probably going to have them sitting a little bit behind the lead singer, but you still want to be able to have them heard at all times. So if you compress them a little harder, it'll allow you to kind of sit them down a little bit behind the lead singer, but they won't get lost. They're always going to kind of be there. So yeah.
I always start with my vocal compression at 3-to-1. Mm-hmm. And then after that point, I'm actually listening to what they're doing. I find that my super dynamic singers, ones that are singing super softly, then all of a sudden belt, that I have to use a higher ratio in order to keep them in the mix.
Yeah.
Sometimes 4-to-1, 5-to-1. Mm-hmm. It depends on how dynamic they are.
Yeah. Yep. And then just to say it, if we take this all the way up to anywhere between about 10-to-1 and then 20-to-1, at that point we're talking about limiting. That's a limiter at that point.
Yep.
And so that is because if you think about those numbers, at a 10-to-1 ratio, at that point that signal is never going to be able to get high enough above the threshold to actually go over the threshold. So at 10-to-1, it's squashing it so hard. As soon as it hits that threshold, it's going to stay there. So,
yeah, it's interesting to note with the ratio of compression that it has almost an EQ effect to our ears.
It certainly can. Yes,
it can adjust tone. For example, when I'm using compression on drums, if I want to hear a ton of snap from the drums and more dynamic range, then I'll use a very low compression ratio, like 2.5 to 1.
Yep.
And that will allow me more pop and snap.
Brighter. Yeah.
Now in the since I'm in house of worship, I'm listening to Christian music all the time. The Bethel style of worship likes the super controlled sounding drums, and they're using compression ratios of 5-to-1, 6-to-1 on all their drums. Yeah, and to create that almost like a brick wall waveform.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, and the way they keep it from becoming losing all the dynamics is through the very next thing that you're going to talk about, which is
the attack and the release. They kind of go together, but we're going to hit them one at a time.
Yeah.
So the attack and the release are essentially the time constants associated with how the compressor reacts to your audio signal. So the attack is the first one, and it is expressed in milliseconds. And so the faster attack you have, the faster the compressor is going to compress the audio once the threshold is breached. So with a fast attack time, let's say around 2 milliseconds, it's still relatively quick. And you can see as I'm kind of changing this, my graph is changing along with me here. So you can see with a faster attack time, that means that as soon as my threshold, whatever signal goes above the threshold, the compressor is going to reach its point of full compression within 2 milliseconds, which is pretty quickly. So it's going to kind of grab that and compress it pretty immediately. And if I ease it off a little bit and take it for a longer attack time, that means that it's going to take it longer for it to reach its full point of compression, which, depending on what you're compressing, can have a very large effect on the overall sound and tone of that instrument or that sound source.
Right.
Because what we're affecting essentially here, if you take the word attack and apply it to the signal, it's affecting the actual attack of the signal. It's not necessarily what that parameter is referring to.
You'll actually lose the transient.
But you'll lose the transient. So if you have a really fast attack time, and you have, it's like a snare drum or whatever it is, that means the compressor is going to immediately start to compress, and it's actually going to compress the transient, which is the initial strike, the initial impulse of the sound. And if you do that, if you compress that immediately, it's going to more or less darken that. Because it's going to be compressing the first instance, the first impulse of that thing, and you lose a lot of the brightness and a lot of the warmth or the warmer characteristics of that sound when that happens. And so to really kind of find the sweet spot here, you want, for the most part, unless you're going for some kind of extreme effect, you want the transient to be able to breathe through, and then you want the compressor to start to grab it, start to compress it almost immediately after that transient has lapsed. So right after you get the impulse of the sound, then the compressor starts to compress the tail of it, more or less. And depending on what it is, so a snare drum is pretty much all transient. You strike the drum and you get that initial sound, that pop, and then it decays virtually instantaneously. Whereas, you can strum a guitar, and you can strum that, and you can hold that, and you can sustain it for just about as long as you want, depending on the instrument. So with something like that, you want that initial strum, that initial strike of the pick hitting the strings to shine through. But then on the sustain of it, you want to start to collapse it and grab it and make sure that doesn't get too out of hand. Yeah, hopefully that was an apt explanation of that and what you want to go for and what you want to use that tool for.
Yep.
And again, it takes practice. It takes using your ears. Get a sound source going, spin the attack super fast so you can hear what that does to it, and then ease it out, take it all the way to the other end, and you'll notice a pretty drastic difference in the tone quality of that sound when you start to play with this parameter. And it's kind of up to you to find where the sweet spot is, or where it sounds the most pleasing and is still giving you the compression effect that you need to maintain its dynamic range.
Right.
And then we have the release, which is the opposite. So after our attack, we reach our point of compression after the attack time is met. And then once the signal eases off and then it goes back down below the threshold, how fast does the compressor release that signal back to its state of no compression? So we go into the compressor, and then the release releases it out of the compression. And again, this has a pretty large effect on the naturality. That's not a word. I think you know what I'm trying to say.
I like it.
If it's too fast, if you have your release too fast, the compressor just kind of like turns itself off as soon as the signal drops down below the threshold. It has a pretty unnatural effect to it.
It has a pumping effect.
A pumping effect, yeah.
Yeah, pumping effect is the best way to describe it.
That is a really good way to describe it. That is what the effect that it gives you. If you're and especially if it's something that's kind of like fluttering in and out of that threshold kind of constantly. Every time that it goes below your threshold and the compressor kicks off immediately, you will kind of hear that change, and it's a little jarring. So again, you got to kind of find the sweet spot here. But if you have it too long, you could actually, if you depending on what it is and depending on where your threshold is set to, a long release time could actually result in the compressor never letting go. So even if the signal actually drops below your threshold, if it takes the compressor too long to release it, and then the signal bumps back up above the threshold, now we're back into compression, and then it drops down below again, but the compressor can't release it fully, before it's going up and around and above and below the threshold. Again, it sounds a little unnatural, and it sounds a little darkened.
It will lose too much dynamic range at that point.
You don't want that. So what you want is for the you want how to explain this. You want the signal to be able to drop down, and you want the compressor to reset itself every time the signal goes below your threshold. That's what you want. So you want every time it goes under and then back up to the threshold, you want that compressor to start from zero and compress it once it goes up, and then let it go and reset before the next time the threshold is breached.
I have a question here from John Gunther, and it was a good one. He asked, do you recommend using compression on every vocal and instrument? And John, I run sound an awful lot, and yes. The answer is yes. I use compression on almost on everything that I do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but some of the places where I use compression is not nearly as strong as other places where I'd use it. For example, like I was talking about earlier on drums, I use very light compression because I like the poppy sounding type of drum. So I'll just do a 2-to-1 or 2.5-to-1 compression on drums. My vocals, it depends on what the vocals are doing. Again, if I have a super dynamic vocalist who's singing really loud, then all of a sudden really soft, I may have to raise the ratio, make the ratio higher to tame that vocal and keep it in the mix. There's compression for fixing problems, and then there's compression for adjusting tone. Like I said earlier, if I wanted to mix drums with ultimate control, like Bethel Worship mixes do, I would use an awful lot of compression, 5-to-1, 6-to-1, to have that kind of dynamic control that they're shooting for in that mix. On my bass, when the bass player is playing, I oftentimes will compress mostly for the slap. So like when the bass player is playing and all of a sudden goes into slapping his bass, a lot of those will escape from the mix. So I'll use enough compression so that the slaps aren't hurting my ears in my mix. On an acoustic guitar, when the acoustic guitar player is playing, it depends on how the player is playing, but some of them do a really hard attack on the strings, and it actually takes away from the tonal quality of the guitar. So I will use,
be careful with that.
Yeah, a little bit more compression on a guitar. I usually start with about 2-to-1 on a guitar though.
Yeah.
And I ease into it till the guitar is sitting in the mix. People have asked me, are there settings that you can recommend for these specific instruments that I can just do? And the answer is no. I can't really say that there are solid starts. I can give you starting ratios maybe, but everything depends on where your input signal coming in as to where you adjust your threshold. Where you adjust your ratio depends how dynamic that instrument is, how loud and soft that instrument is, and then I will adjust that from there. The attack, same thing. I usually, for drums especially, will have a pretty long attack because I want to hear the full transient of the drum come through. Keyboards, it's funny because my first instrument is piano, and hey, Jason, you're going to laugh. I get into arguments with John Graves about this all the time. He likes to compress his pianos. To me, compressing piano just seems wrong. But the more I'm mixing, the more I realize piano is such a dynamic.
It's very dynamic. Yep.
That there is definitely a place for that. And again, I'm adjusting that the threshold and ratio according to how he's playing. Now they are tricky because they have volume foot pedals. So some keyboardists make it really hard to find a good solid compression setting.
Totally. Yeah, that's keyboards and pianos are a little bit trickier to add compression to in a live scenario. It's very prominent in recording. Compressing piano parts, even compressing specific bandwidths within the compressor. Like you compress the low end, you like the low keys only kind of thing. There's all kinds of cool, fun tricks you can do recording with compression. But actually, I wanted to kind of back up a little bit. You mentioned people asking for recommendations on specific settings. One thing that we could steer you to in some instances is actually the presets on the Touch Mix. We do have a myriad of different presets for different instruments and things like that. Now, the thing about the presets are not all of these are going to offer compressor settings. It just depends on the application, but many of them do. And it is a great place to kind of start and kind of
the preset actually says the word comp.
It does, and I'll give you an example of that. So whoops, I got my camera's in the way of my view of my mixer. If I go to drums, if I go to some of the kick stuff in here, I'll go to kick with a sub. And then we got gates there. No, there we go. There we go. Here we go. So here's a snare preset we have. We got the Snare Rock Bright Comp, the CMP, and the name of that compressor indicates that it has a compressor setting in that preset. So anything that has comp or CMP in the name will indicate a compressor setting. And if I go to, let's see, my vocal settings, there we go. So I've got my two vocal presets there for musical applications. I've got a female and a vocal preset, and both of those have compressor settings in them. So that's a great way to study the compressor settings, or give yourself a starting point. Now, again, just kind of like the presets in general, for every application, it might not be spot on, but it's going to actually get you pretty close. And that goes with the EQ settings and the compressor settings, if it does include the compressor. So I would say that's a pretty good place to start if you're looking for recommendations, or you're looking for just a starting point, to kick off from.
Those presets are assuming that you've set your input gain to a proper level. And if you set your input gain to a proper level, see last week's video, then those presets are going to fall very close to the right place.
We got actually a couple questions that I'll answer about the presets. And then I'm going to actually show you some compression in real time on my vocal mic here. So it's like Dean's asking, what kind of compression would you use for a 57 on an acoustic guitar? We actually have a preset for that. Not necessarily specifically a 57, and might not be specific to your guitar, but we do have a number of acoustic guitar presets based on mic positions and even pickup with a DI, things like that. So I would say start with the preset. And if you were to take a look at any one of those, let me show you real quick. Let me see. Do any of these actually? Here we go. Acoustic guitar. Comp. We'll just pick that first one there. There you go. So that could be a pretty good place to start. So we've got a threshold of about -26 there. We're at a 2.2 to 3 to 1 ratio. We've got 6.7 milliseconds on the attack and a very, very fast release. We got 50 milliseconds on the release, which is relatively quick. So there they go. Again, I would consider that like a starting point. Maybe kind of recall that, see what that does, how that performs, how your guitar performs with those settings, and then you might need to tweak them slightly from there. You might need to maybe adjust your threshold one way or the other depending on where your level's at. Maybe adjust your tack time depending on how you actually play the guitar, how hard your attack is on those strings, things like that. But I would say that is a fantastic place to start there. And then we had another question from William asking, is there a limit to the number of presets that you can create on your own? I would say the short answer is no. You can create and save as many presets as your heart desires. Caveat to that is if you're saving them directly to the mixer, you can save about 150 to the mixer internally. But if you have a USB storage device, you can fill that thing up for whatever capacity you have at your disposal there. So really, no, there's no limit.
So Jake Wright, I like your question. He has 7 singers who sing lead on every song, and he wants to know if he should be adjusting the compressor settings for each singer as they are switching from lead to backing. And my question for you, Jake, is, are you trying to run sound from the stage while performing at the same time? Because you aren't going to be able to.
No, you won't be able to do
make
that.
those changes. But a front of house person, if you have a front of house mixer, I would definitely be adjusting the lead singer as we go. I call it active mixing. My fingers are all over the faders and all over the controls at all times, making changes according to what the dynamics of the song are doing.
I mean, is it possible to have just like one microphone that they can pass around to each other as they're taking turns singing?
Pre-COVID.
Just a suggestion. Wah, wah, wah.
That's actually a great way to solve it, though, Jason, is by having one mic be the lead mic, and they step
lead
up
mic,
the lead mic.
yeah. So that singer, as they take their part, they sing the lead into the lead mic, and then people can switch out, and then you have the backup mics set up as well.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it.
Good question. Oh, he's front house only. So there you go. Just so then, get in there and get dynamic with it.
Yeah. Create a beautiful sonic landscape.
Cool.
Let's quickly talk about that makeup gain.
Yeah, let's talk about this. Oh, actually, we'll get there. I wanted to show you. So I've got my microphone set up here. So I'm speaking into this mic right here, and you can see. I just wanted to kind of show this to you with some active meters. You can see my input and my output meters there, and I'm going to start to tweak this threshold now, so you can actually see the gain reduction meter start happening. That's the
meter in the middle.
And it's going to be, so these guys are going to be red. I'm sorry, green. The gain reduction in the middle is going to be red when it illuminates, and it's going to go backwards. So where this is showing gain coming in, and this is going to be attenuation. So it's actually going to show you it's taking away gain from my signal. All right, let's get into this. Go down. There we are. So there we go. I've got that at a pretty low threshold, and I'm hitting it really hard. You can see the gain reduction meters are activating pretty much constantly as I'm talking, and as I speak a little bit more deliberately into the microphone, it gets pretty hot. So if I were to back that up, something around here. Hello. So you can see I was just kind of dipping in there every now and then. That is pretty much what you'd want. You might maybe want it a little bit harder if it's a vocal performance. And for something like this, where I'm just kind of talking to you to maintain sort of a natural sound, it's okay to kind of have it just kind of barely just tapping in there like that. And then from there, you can adjust your other parameters. Let's just play with this for a second. I'm going to take this down to a pretty heavy level, and I'm going to take my attack, and I'm going to put that all the way to the front. So you can kind of hear what that might be doing. Now, the stream here is doing some funny stuff to the audio, so you might not be
has some
getting the full effect of what's happening here, but it's doing stuff. But the biggest thing I wanted to show you here was the meters just kind of alive and active on a signal.
Absolutely.
Cool. So yeah, you're right. The fifth parameter here is gain, the makeup gain. So with our compressor activated, when it is compressing, it is actually attenuating signal, right? That's what we're doing. That's what we're talking about. So it can be advantageous to use the gain to reapply gain after the compressor's done its job, so that you can kind of bring your overall signal back up to the level that it was initially at in the input here. So you'll also notice here, as you start to compress your signal, these two meters will stray from each other. Your output meter will probably end up being a little bit less than what your input meter was, because you're now compressing your signal, and so the output is going to be lower. Your makeup gain will allow you to boost that signal back up to the level you had it at before you started to compress it. You can hear I just added 4 dB to my mic, and it got significantly warmer. So there you go. So that is more or less what the purpose of that is. It can be used creatively. You can give yourself more gain if you want that sound. You can also use this as an additional gain stage in the mixer at all. So let's say you don't necessarily need the application of the compressor. So you can kind of just leave it neutral, leave the threshold all the way up, leave the ratio at 0 to 1. So you're not compressing the signal at all, but then you still have this gain available to you. So if you just want to add a little bit of gain after the analog preamp, and maybe even after the digital gain, you've got 20 dB that you can give yourself in the compressor itself. So it can act as, if nothing else, just another gain stage for you.
I do that in my DAW a lot of times.
Yes. Yep.
Yep.
Cool. That took us through our 5 parameters on our Starship compressor here.
Yeah.
And I think that was good. I think we got through all of it. Another thing we should maybe talk about, and I think you might have a slide on this, Golden, is our graphic itself on our compressor here. This graphic that we have here is somewhat unique to TouchMix, and that it'll show you what the compressor is doing to your audio signal over time. So what's included in this graphic are these 2 time constants. As I adjust my release and my attack, I can see that represented on the graph there. There are many compressors that leave that part out.
Awesome.
Yeah, so this is really painting up the whole picture of how the compressor is behaving and how it's reacting to your signal. One of the most common graphics used on a compressor completely eliminates these 2 controls. It just kind of gives you a graph with this kind of curving, this diagonal and curving line, and it's semi-useful if you know what you're looking at, but it can be pretty confusing.
Yeah, there we go. Here's the slide. Most compressors on DAWs and other mixers look exactly like this.
Yep.
No worries if you don't understand what the graphic looks like. You now know what ratio means, you know what attack means, you know what release means, you know how to use your makeup gain, you know your 5 controls. So you can be looking at your controls and listening to what's going on and still make the same awesome adjustments, even though the graphic looks different.
There you go.
Very cool. Let's sum it all up here.
Let's actually real quick. I think we might have a couple more questions that might be good to answer. So let's see. Dean's asking about the guitar, I believe. So we have the gain up in both compression and in the setup. Let's get the mic. So you gotta gain it up pretty hard to get the mic picking up the guitar, is what I'm getting out of that. And so at that point, you're pretty close to feedback. That's a toughie, because that kind of also brings in gain structure in general, and is having a proper gain structure there. Gosh, a 57 on a guitar not picking up. I mean, I would say if you've got your gain structure, if you got your analog trim all the way up and you're still not have a healthy signal on that guitar, go into your digital gain and apply some digital gain there, and so you can get a nice level initially, and then go in and compress it from there. From that point, yes, the compressor can help to sort of eliminate the feedback but again, it's going to do that by not allowing the instrument overall to get too loud.
Here's a good one: is the compressor pre or post fader? From Paul Wiltzberger.
That is a good question. I believe it is post by default. Let's see here, but here we go. Yeah, it's pre by default. But in the setup here, so in my mixer setup, I've got this dynamics processing control. You can see it's defaults to pre-EQ. Or you can set it to post EQ. That is EQ, sorry, not fader. I believe all of the processing is post fader, however.
Yes.
That's a good question. I might have to follow up with that on you. Follow up for that through. I believe it's post fader, but I am not 100% sure. Let's see here. Why use the knee? Good question. We can talk about the knee for a second. So this control up here is the knee. Depending on the compressor, you actually might be able to actually adjust the value of the knee itself. But in our compressor here, we just have the knee in and the out. And if you can see on the graphic kind of what that's doing, the knee is essentially the point at which we get into the full state of compression and then get out of the full state of compression. So it's right at the moment where the compressor reaches its maximum compressed level. And with the knee engaged, it sort of kind of just rounds that off a little bit, and it makes it a little more natural sounding. It eases it into the compressor a little more, which can give you a little bit more of a natural sound to it. If you disengage that, you can see it's a pretty sharp point there. And so it means it's going to, once it gets to that point, it's just going to lay right into it, and it's going to be a little bit, it's going to be a little bit quicker and a little bit more accented at that point when it hits the compression. So there you go. That would be the knee. Why would you use the knee? And I believe our compressor defaults with it on. Many of the presets will also leave it on. But again, it's something that is good to know about and good to play with. Kind of try your settings with it in and with it out. Overall, a lot of things, personally, I leave it in because I like the more kind of natural, rounded sound of it. But sometimes you want it to just get right to the point and just hit that compressor a little harder. Very good. Let's see. Let me just scan the questions one last time here. Can you save scenes for the lead mic thing? I mean, yes, you can save scenes and presets. Not quite sure what a lead mic thing specifically would be. Like, which...
I think he's asking about saving the preset. Like he made a preset for a lead singer's mic.
Okay, absolutely. You can save that preset. And that would just be going into your preset section, and you toggle this switch right there from factory to user. And that takes you into the user settings. And then from here, you can hit the save as button right there. And then it'll essentially save a preset that consists of whatever the channel is set to at that moment. So it'll save everything. It'll save your EQ, your effects, your compressor, your gate, whatever settings you have set up on that channel, you can save it, kind of just take a snapshot of it and be able to recall those settings at any other time. Pretty simple to do. Cool.
Did we get them all? I can't see the whole thread, but
I think we did it. Thanks, Brad. Thank you. Yeah. Awesome. Cool, guys. Fantastic questions out there. I love answering questions. It's super fun. What do you got? You want to close this out here, Golden?
Yeah, because I got a great slide for this. So we learned about all those controls, but here's an easy way to think of your controls. Let's bring up the slide for that. The compressor is like your mother. Threshold, the level she asks you to turn down the music.
Mm-hmm.
Ratio, how much you turn down the volume after she shouts at you. Attack, how fast you react. And release, how fast you turn the volume back up as soon as she closes the door.
Oh, yeah.
So I wanted to really quick just update you on a few things. I wanted to tell you about the 2 groups that we have going on that are super helpful here. Our Facebook groups, we have the QSC Touch Mix group. If you own a Touch Mix, are interested in owning a Touch Mix, or just find yourself mixing on a Touch Mix, this is a very informative group to talk about everything Touch Mix. And the other Facebook group that we have is one that I host. It's called Church Sound Training. The group was actually created for church sound people and their volunteers, but the audio concepts that are taught here are universal and applicable across the board, because Adding to your audio knowledge and understanding helps you to operate your touch mix and all other audio equipment with better skill and precision. Just want to remind you, coming up is NAMM. Don't forget to register for NAMM. This year, NAMM is actually an online event. It's happening from January 18th through the 22nd. You can go to the URL attend.believeInmusic.tv to register for the event. And we got 2 QSE people teaching at it. We have Chris Brulette is going to be teaching managing low frequency radiation. His class is on Thursday. I'm going to be teaching a tech track for House of Worship. It's how to optimize your worship service mix for broadcast and live streaming. And that one is going to be on Friday. Also want to let you know, as you're looking at the slide, you'll see the schedule link there. There are 150 sessions or different teaching seminars ranging. And all different genres for you to learn things from. So I encourage you, go ahead and register for that as soon as you're able, and let's get our learning on.
Good. It's good. It's good education happening.
Yeah. Well, Jason, it's been super fun.
Yeah. Once again, good time, good discussion. Yep. Glad we got to talk about this, and we'll do it again soon.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a good one.
Have a good one.